Metal Gear Solid 3 probably had one of the best and often convoluted storylines compared to most games. Within this series of videos, I wish to explore the lore of the Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater video game, starting with an overview of the main bosses that players will encounter in the game, the Cobra unit. The Metal Gear games have always featured some of the most epic boss fights, and particularly the bosses in this game often serve as a subject of inquiry. So without further delay, let's begin our overview of the Cobra unit. The Cobra unit was a group of soldiers trained to win wars and were fitted with supernatural abilities that allowed them to turn the tide in the middle of a battle. Through these abilities, they stood out from the average soldier. Their military careers aren't really discussed that much in the game, but we do know that they played a pivotal role in World War II. The origins of the Cobra unit date back to 1942 during World War II. Their first recorded battle that took place was the Battle of Stalingrad. This battle was fought on the Eastern Front in southern Russia. Today, the battle is considered a major turning point in the war, as it forced the German High Command to withdraw their military forces from various areas in Eastern Europe, along with resulting in the destruction of Nazi Germany's 6th Army and 4th Panzer Army. The battle also worked to help Soviet Russia retain control of the major industrial and transport hub located near the Volga River. It was here where soldiers on both sides witnessed the overwhelming might of the Cobras. The Cobras would also play a famous role in June 6, 1944 in the D-Day landings at Normandy, France. Upon landing on the shores of France, they were sent on a mission to destroy several more V-2 rocket installations of the German army. There are very little records of their operations throughout this time, as they mostly did the jobs of the Allied powers that no one else wanted to do. Their missions were so top secret that each of the members was forbidden to be taken prisoner, and for that reason, each of them was implanted with a microbomb which explodes upon their death or capture. Even if they were captured, the Cobra unit could still serve as a weapon of some sort.
I've caught you at last! We are the sons of the boss! Ha! I am the pain!
Pain is often a feeling soldiers in wartime feel, whether that be through physical injuries or mental torment. For some, pain can be harnessed as a key weapon, and that brings us to the Hornet soldier himself, the Pain. The towering Hornet controlling soldier known as the Pain is the second Cobra you encounter throughout the span of Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater. He does this by secreting a heterogeneous pheromone from his body. He also uses his Queen Bee found in his backpack to make sounds that guide Hornets. The Pain's combat suit features a ventilation opening for his Hornets to come in and out of his body. His true origins are pretty obscure, and I should say that will be the case for the majority of Cobra members. The Pain was believed to have been born sometime around the early 20th century. In the early 1910s, he was affected with a rare parasite which resulted in his body secreting insect pheromones. According to the official MGS3 Snake Eater guide, at one point in his life, the Pain decided to allow several thousands of different insects to sting him for months at a time. He apparently took a special fascination to the Hornet. While the pheromones gave him the power to control insects, it was also an incredibly painful process that would have killed anyone else. But for some reason, the pain he experienced didn't result in his death. Rather, the young Hornet soldier would receive large amounts of adrenaline that fueled his endurance. Over time, the pheromones would result in his face being covered with welts and stings. Other than his Hornets, the Pain can also attack with an old school Tommy gun and grenades, which sometimes are carried by Hornet soldiers. His Hornets can also serve as an improvised body shield that protects him from enemy fire. He can also use his Hornets to create a body double to fool enemies. One more weapon that he has in his inventory are the special Hornets known as bullet bees. These bullet beams are deployed from his mouth and can move as fast as bullets, if not faster. They are known to burrow deep into enemies and eat away at the flesh until the enemy eventually dies. Pain is definitely one of the most interesting boss encounters you'll have in Snake Eater, as you aren't just fighting him, you're also fighting his vast swarm of hornets, which can sometimes number in the thousands or 1000s. But exactly what kind of hornets does the Pain use in battle? More than likely it's the Asian giant hornet, known to inhabit parts of Asia along with Russia's Far East. Their venom contains a neurotoxin called mandarotoxin that can be deadly with multiple stings. In terms of communication and perception, the Asian hornet uses scent masking to direct members of the colony to a food source. This chemical comes from their 6th sternal gland and is mainly used as a tactic for hunting prey. Throughout the boss fight, it's always a good idea to dive in the water and swim around in order to avoid the hornet swarm. While immersed in the water, hornets will not be able to touch you, and their scent will wash off you if you were exposed to them beforehand. If there's one word that describes the Cold War era, it's fear. Fear of a Soviet invasion, fear of an American society collapsing to the might of the Soviet Union, and most assuredly the fear of nuclear destruction. Of course, for our purposes, we will focus on the fear ignited on the battlefield experienced by many soldiers. The terrible feelings that come from seeing comrades die right in front of you, or facing off against an enemy you have no chance against. Enter the fear. Born in the USSR around the early 20th century, the deadly spider soldier known as the Fear was a master of infiltration for the Cobra unit. Throughout his youth, he underwent several extensive surgeries in order to improve his capabilities in stealth and close quarters combat. For one, he had double joints. These allowed him to move more flexible and crawl, flip, and leap much faster. His movements mirrored the very same pattern movements of a spider in the jungle terrain. Next up are the reptilian eyes, which gave him a heightened vision and perception just like a chameleon or a Komodo dragon. With this vision, he was able to see people and objects from afar with ease. And for some reason, which is unknown, the Fear is able to run on water in the same manner as a frilled lizard. In combat, the Fear uses a special stealth camouflage that allows him to be virtually invisible. This suit is equipped with a certain function that allows the wearer to blend in with the light around their bodies. While the suit worked well, it would drain the human body of stamina the longer the wearer used the stealth function. This results in the Fear losing his stamina much faster. For that reason, he will constantly be eating in between his fight with Snake. While fighting the Fear, it will help a great deal if you have the thermal goggles equipped, as you'll be able to see his body heat despite his quick movements. For weaponry, Fear uses 2 crossbows, the William Tell and the smaller Little Joe. Both crossbows are coated with an animal venom. One of them happens to be the venom from a Brazilian wandering spider, also known as the banana spider. One bite delivers a neurotoxic venom which leaves the victim with a severe burning pain, sweating, and goosebumps. The victim also experiences a decreased heart rate, abdominal cramping, and blurred vision. This is why the Fear boss fight is especially annoying. With its poison arrows, you will constantly have to heal yourself and remove arrows. The Fear is one force to be reckoned with, and has everything to do with his cunning nature and quick wit. Along with being a master of infiltration, he also knows a great deal about setting up traps. Pretty much every booby trap that you encounter on the way to the research lab will be set up by the Fear. While avoiding arrows, you must also be mindful of the various traps in the area as well. Whoever performed the surgeries on the Fear sure as hell knew what they were doing. He seems to be the most formidable in the battlefield.
Hello?
I beg of you, grant me the strength to take this final prey.
Many soldiers in the battlefield either fear or welcome death as an escape from the horrors of warfare. Some impatiently seek to avoid the end, while some patiently embrace it. And it is that fear which drives a soldier to constantly consider their own inevitable end on the battlefield. That very uncertainty which drives some to the point of madness, that is the feeling which drives the end. Known as the Ancient Sniper and Father of Sniping, the End was born sometime between the mid-19th century. He is known as the oldest member of the Cobra unit, along with being a veteran of countless wars. At some point in his early career, the End was infected with a species of parasite that greatly increased his lifespan and gave him a way to produce energy without having to ever eat. Like plants, the End can convert sunlight into food molecules through the process of photosynthesis. He can remain on the field of battle for days without eating. Additionally, he has also developed a heightened sense of perception that allows him to operate as a sniper without having to have a spotter nearby. Although he does use a spotter anyway, and that is his pet parrot who refers to him as Grandpa. This bird, along with his plant-like abilities, allow him to literally communicate with all living organisms in any terrain. Also helping him in combat is a special ghillie suit, which forms a natural moss that the End uses to conceal his whereabouts. Like the Fear, the End shares some lizard-like qualities. I've already mentioned his heightened perception, and that's due to the fact that he has lizard eyes that give him increased depth perception, much like the Fear. He also has the ability to lower his temperature by putting himself in a prone position to become one with his surroundings, in the very same way that lizards change their posture to expose themselves to sun rays while trying to regulate their body temperature. Whenever you're near the End, he will sporadically move out of harm in a similar fashion as a lizard, along with damaging Snake at close range. The End boss encounter is definitely one for the books. It's not your average boss fight at all, but rather a test of patience and endurance. You basically engage in a sniper battle where you have to track down and spot the End, and whenever possible, shoot him. Meanwhile, he'll be doing the exact same thing to you. Only thing is, he won't deal any damage to your health, but rather your stamina. Armed with the Mosin Nagant sniper rifle, this particular gun was modified to fire tranquilizer rounds rather than bullets. If you are down by the End, he will simply pick you up and carry you back to a jail cell in the old research lab. It's never clear why the End wouldn't kill Snake, but it's believed that he always had a natural unwillingness to kill. And this is a little confusing when you consider how many wars he's been in. Are we supposed to believe that he never killed anyone in the many different wars he's fought in? More than likely, it probably has to do with the fact that the End up to this point had been saving what little energy he had left for his fight against Snake. And inevitably, he would end up dying and meeting his own end. So by using a tranquilizer, he can possibly make his fight with Snake last longer and thereby delaying his death. But that's just a theory of mine. Who really knows his intentions? After all, he barely talks until we finally face off against him. In the heat of battle, oftentimes a soldier's fury can be their best friend. It's through that fury where soldiers become more and more driven to defeat their enemy, and that is the feeling which drives the fury. As Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater takes place during the Cold War era, there are a lot of references pertaining to the nuclear and space races had out between the United States and Soviet Union. The fury is a direct product of the Soviet space race. as he was the first ever human to reach orbit, far before the astronaut Yuri Gagarin. But while re-entering Earth's orbit, the Fury was met with a horrible accident that would pretty much leave him engulfed by flames and suffer from a tremendous deal of burns on his body. During this accident, the Fury would develop a fascination and obsession with fire, along with gaining a deep desire to set the world to flames. Out of all the Cobra unit members, the Fury was probably the most aggressive and insane. The only emotion he could ever express was anger, and that is what drives him in battle. In battle, the Fury wears a special Soviet cosmonaut suit equipped with a jetpack and flamethrower. This flamethrower used a special type of rocket fuel that continued to burn long after it had been ignited. He's probably the easiest boss in the game, but at the same time he should not be underestimated. His flame attacks can deal a lot of damage close range.
Are you one of the Cobras?
Sad. So sad. A host of sorrows. And you are one of them.
Sorrow is another feeling soldiers experience in battle. The sorrow expressed from losing comrades or seeing innocents die. In some cases, expressing sorrow for the enemy who you just killed. That is the feeling which drives the Sorrow, the spirit medium soldier. Well, I should say drove, since the Sorrow by 1964 is the only member of the Cobra unit that is deceased. In the game, he only exists as an entity which for some reason only Snake can see. For some time around the 20th century, the Sorrow during his early years as a soldier was gifted with the use of ESP and precognition, which allowed him to serve as a medium between the living world and spiritual world. With this ability, he determined the outcome of all battles and strategized what would be most likely to happen next by communicating with the dead. In the game, you face the Sorrow after escaping Groznygrad Research Lab. This boss encounter isn't really a fight, rather Snake will just have to move around the dead spirits of all the people he's killed since the beginning of Operation Snake Eater. That includes the 3 Cobra members who Snake faced off before reaching the lab. If you come into contact with these spirits, they will drain Snake's health, so you have to avoid them and also avoid the occasional energy blast from the Sorrow himself. The only way the boss fight can end is by Snake dying. The Sorrow is believed to have died in 1962 by the hands of his former comrade, the Boss. After the war, the Cobra members had all gone their several ways. Those loyal to the US, such as the Boss, took on jobs for the US military, while the Russian-born members, such as the Sorrow, went on to work for the Soviet military. The Sorrow performed espionage for the Russian government, and he would be responsible for converting a double agent planted in the Soviet Union by the Boss over to the Soviet side. He also provided the US with false analysis of the schematics of one of the Sputnik models. This move put him in direct conflict with the Boss, who at the time was working as a US agent tasked with killing him. In 1962, the Boss found the Sorrow in Russia and eliminated the medium. That's not what really happened. See, the story is a little bit more complicated than that. Throughout World War II, the Boss, or the Joy, and the Sorrow were the perfect pair in combat. They complemented each other, and over time they grew closer and closer, until finally becoming lovers. In 1943, the Joy was pregnant with her first child, the father being Sorrow. On D-Day in 1944, Joy was forced to give birth to a child, while injured on the battlefield. In her state, a regular childbirth would have killed her. She was forced to have a C-section, leaving her with a permanent snake-shaped scar. Soon after her son was born, he was taken away by the very same organization that created the Cobras in the first place. That being the Philosophers, which I won't dive heavy into right now as the topic deserves a video itself. Just know that the Philosophers are a group of powerful and rich individuals who basically controlled the world throughout the early 20th century. They were responsible for carrying out major world events. And that is all I will say for right now. In 1962, they would force the boss to terminate her lover and comrade, or else they would kill her son. While the Sorrow is dead, he is frequently seen through the eyes of Snake across multiple cutscenes in Snake Eater. Sometimes he provides handy radio frequencies and even provides a timer after you plant the C3 bombs on the Shagohide. In each encounter, he always has a menacing smile, which is a contrast to what you would expect from a guy named the Sorrow.
Looks like death wasn't ready for you yet.
Boss.
That arm still hurt?
What are you doing here?
Go home. Go home. Gru and my sons are waiting up ahead. You don't have a prayer of finishing your mission. You're not even armed.
Boss!
I'm not your boss anymore. There's nothing for you here. Go home. Go back to your boss. There's no need to prove that you are virtuous here. This isn't America.
The last Cobra unit, the Joy, derives her attitude from the happiness and content in battle experienced by veteran soldiers. Born in 1922 as the daughter of a high-ranking member of the Wiseman Committee, which would later go on to be the Philosophers, the boss was a very fearsome tool for the Philosophers and the U.S. Army. Throughout World War II, she was a special advisor and formed the 22nd SAS Regiment, where she planned out strategic bombings of German air bases, along with capturing important German officers. Throughout the late 1930s and 40s, she developed the familiar close quarters combat. In 1942, she would form the Cobra unit to secure Allied victories in Stalingrad, Normandy, and a number of other key battles. In 1942, she was ordered to eliminate the Manhattan Project scientist John von Neumann under the belief that he was a Nazi spy. But just before the operation could commence, she got pregnant due to her love affair with the Sorrow. During the mission, she ended up blowing her cover and was shot. And at the last second, she avoided her stomach being shot, and the bullet ended up penetrating her skull. Rather than dying, she ended up in a coma for 6 months. She and her baby would end up surviving. In 1944, during the D-Day landing, when the Cobras were sent to destroy several V-2 rocket installations, she gave birth to her child on the battlefield. During the first part of the Cold War, when the Cobra unit officially broke up, the boss became a test subject for the US government. She would find herself involved in an atomic testing in the Nevada desert in 1951. It was here where she met a 15-year-old teen by the name of Jack. Both would be exposed to the radiation as a result of the nuclear bomb testing. Throughout the 1950s, the boss would further develop CQC as a combat and fighting technique with the help of her student Jack. And from here, the two would develop a close relationship that would last for years, leading up to the events in Snake Eater. In 1959, the boss was sent on a secret mission by the president to recruit Russians who were against the single-party regime in Moscow. The boss was tasked to use intelligence gained from defectors to sabotage Russian space projects. She did manage to place a sleeper agent to recruit defectors, and the CIA took over the operation soon after. Now for a minute, let's just recall what the Sorrow did during the Cold War as an espionage agent. He was responsible for recruiting a US sleeper agent into Soviet ranks and fed the US false information regarding the Soviet space program, particularly Sputnik 5. The boss discovered this upon seeing the discrepancies in the Soviet blueprints. When she tried to alert the CIA of the false information, they practically ignored her. And as a result, she would infiltrate the Soviet Union and break into a research facility to discover the truth. Upon breaking in, she discovered that the defected sleeper agent was working with the CIA the entire time and were actually pocketing a large amount of his paycheck. Like the Fury, the boss will also become one of the first humans to reach space orbit through her work in the Project Mercury in 1961. Also known as the first human spaceflight program of the United States. What made the boss the ideal candidate for this dangerous mission was her already exposed body from the testing site in Nevada. This made her less likely to die or be severely affected by the harmful rays of the sun. She survived the space journey, but she too was severely injured when returning to the orbit, and as a result she was sent into another 6-month-long coma. This mission at the time was seen as an absolute failure, so much so that the CIA wanted to completely cover it up, since it would have made the US space program seem inferior to the Soviet Union space program. Although the boss was the first American in space, her record of the voyage would be covered up as well. This would cause her to develop a deep resentment towards the US government. To add insult to injury, while in her coma, the CIA used this opportunity to claim that she was behind the botched Bay of Pigs invasion of Cuba. After she recovered, the United States resented her due to a failed space mission and a Russian success in the spaceflight. In 1962, the Soviet branch of the philosophers discovered her sleeper agent, the same sleeper agent that the Tsar was able to recruit over to the Russian side. At this point, I do wish to share a little bit more on the philosophers, as it's very much relevant here. As the 20th century spanned on, this group grew more and more divided, and by the 1930s, splinter groups would actually form. These groups would in turn compete with each other for control, and by the 1960s, the Soviet branch of the philosophers and the United States branch of the philosophers would grow to have more and more contempt for each other. And basically, their rivalry would kind of fuel the tensions experienced by the US and the USR throughout the Cold War. While rivals, splinter groups could work together to keep their operatives in check. And they had plenty to watch out for, as the philosophers, once again, were the ones who funded the creation of the Cobra unit. And between World War II and 1964, the Cobra unit had been employed in multiple operations sponsored by the philosophers. In 1962, the Soviet branch of the philosophers, who had found the boss had planted a sleeper agent, actually ended up turning to the Tsar, who then in turn defected the sleeper agent. The fact that the Tsar could turn an agent easily enough made him a threat to the CIA and the American branch of the philosophers. The boss was then sent to kill the Tsar, while at the same time the Soviet branch in the USSR ordered the Tsar to eliminate the boss. Up until this time, the philosophers still had in their possession the son of boss and the Tsar. If neither agreed to carry out the mission, the philosophers would kill the baby. In the same year, the two would meet in Russia, and the Tsar would volunteer to die in order to keep their child safe. The boss executed the Tsar with a shot to the left eye. In 1964, the boss took an active part as a field advisor in the Virtuous mission to rescue the defected Russian scientist Sokolov. But this was a ruse, as it turns out that she herself had actually defected to the Soviet Union and joined up with the extremist faction GRU, led by Colonel Volkin, aka Thunderbolt. She ambushes Snake after he rescues Sokolov, and is there where she announces her defection. When I first played Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater, I remember feeling pretty sorry for Snake upon hearing that his former mentor, who he had not seen for 5 years, is now an agent for the enemy. But after reading about the boss's background, I could see why she defected. After all, the US not only took away her accomplishments in being the first American to go to space, they also blamed her for the Bay of Pigs fiasco. She was also forced to kill her friend, comrade, and father of her child. At the very end of the game, we found out that her defection was another ruse. because as it turns out, she secretly remained in contact with the US on a mission to recover the Philosopher's legacy, a tiny microfilm that serves as a means of assessing the Philosopher's vast sum of money that was pulled together before their divisions in the 1930s. We also find out that this microfilm was the entire reason why the Cold War took place, as each of the splinter groups of the Philosophers were fighting for control and whereabouts of the tiny microfilm, as this was the way to access the Philosopher's massive money. It was what the boss was after the entire time, and upon her death she gives it to Snake and asks him to keep it safe. So there you have it, the lore of the Cobra unit, one of the most memorable lineup of bosses found in any video game. If you enjoy these kind of videos that explore the lore behind classic video games, well, make sure you subscribe and comment and also like. And if you haven't already, yeah, please subscribe. This is your man Bob of Smoking Fiend Productions signing off. Thank you very much for watching. Peace out.